Good evening.
It doesn't broadcast over, it's just for the record.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call to order the joint meeting of the City of Fitchburg Committee of the Whole and the Village Board of Oregon for Wednesday, December 25th, 2026. I would ask the City of Fitchburg Committee of the Whole to call the roll.
Good evening, all. Mayor Arata Frada.
Here.
Alder Dantzler Jr. is absent with excuse. Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst is also absent with excuse. Alder Jetzer.
Here.
Alder Laduse.
Here.
Alder Lepper. Not seen him yet. Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Alder Reichstead.
Here.
There's a quorum for us.
Thank you. I would ask the clerk to call the roll for the Village of Oregon.
All right, so Trustee Tim Higgins,
Here.
Trustee Tom Kirchdorfer,
Here.
Trustee Rick Marks,
Here.
Trustee Lynn McDaniel,
Here.
Trustee Amanda Peterson. Here. And President Phil Van Kampen.
Here.
And Trustee Paige Knipfer is absent this evening.
Thank you. And Gabriella has offered to chair the meeting without objection. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm going to introduce our topic of tonight. The Capital Area Regional Planning Commission has been hired by both the City of Fitchburg and the Village of Oregon to do this findings for development in the southeastern part of Fitchburg. And we've invited Jason Valerius here tonight to give the presentation on his findings. Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here and to be doing this. I keep asking people, when was the last time these two groups got together? And I haven't gotten a clear answer to that because we're not sure if it's happened. So I think this is pretty cool just by itself. We could walk out now and I think this still would have been a success. But I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about to kind of tell you what we've been doing over the past couple of months. And as you'll see in my presentation, I invite you to ask questions throughout. But first is to tell you briefly about CARPC, about the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. We exist to help communities work together. We are particularly focused on the issues of water quality protection. So we have a role to play in the extension of sewer service area throughout the county and managing the Dane County Water Quality Plan. And then we also work on land use. We have a regional plan called the Regional Development Framework that advances various principles of development to try to guide how things work. We don't have any power in that role, but we did a lot of public input and advocate for those values and those policies that we uncovered as we went out talking to people a few years back. The other thing we do, and this is kind of why we're here tonight, is various forms of community assistance, working with communities, especially on issues that relate to these two topics. And this is very much a land use discussion. So I think you all know why we're here, but I'll go through the motions to say it anyhow. The purpose of this small introductory project that I'm helping you with is to consider the future uses of land that are in Fitchburg, but near to Oregon, there between the highway interchange and the border of your two communities. And our main focus here was a series of listening sessions with key stakeholders. Those stakeholders included folks both from the city and the village. In each case, a selection of key staff members and several members of your elected and appointed bodies. So for the city, we had your administrator, planning, economic development, and engineering all represented, Mayor Arata Frada and Alders Gerhardt and Ludausa participating in that discussion. And then for the village, kind of a similar configuration. We had your administrator, planning, engineering, public works all represented, President Van Kampen, Trustee Higgins, and Plan Commissioner Bieno. We also met with the two key public landowners. So as you know, we have Department of Corrections land in this study area and land owned by the school district. And so we were able to secure meetings with each of them. And those meetings were conducted with representation from both the city, staff representation, your staff planners, both from the city and the village. And we also then we had 5 separate meetings with private landowners. Most of the acreage in the area is represented by 4 landowners. We met with all of those, plus one of the other smaller parcel residential owners. And then there's only one other landowner that I didn't directly meet with, but we definitely communicated with. And so everyone in this area is aware of this process and has one way or another expressed their interests and kind of knows what we're working on here. So we will launch into the findings. And I'm going to start with some general observations. We'll go through some specific categories of things. And at the end, I've got things that aren't really findings so much as recommendations on what your next steps will be. Question?
Yeah, I probably should have asked this question way in advance, but I'm just looking at a map and I noticed like there's the village of Oregon and then there's like the town of Oregon, which seems like a much bigger parcel of land. For the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about kind of only the area that may border the village of Oregon, right?
Yeah, so to kind of put this into a wider context, both geographically and in time, there are other areas around the village that are currently town of Oregon and that the village has been and may continue over time to grow into. This area between the boundary and the highway, absent the fact that this undeveloped land is in the city, which is not something that the village has the ability to annex or grow into, absent that fact, had this still been town of Fitchburg, I can pretty much guarantee you that this would have been developed since the highway went in. And it hasn't because there is no opportunity for annexation. The focus of this process is only on these lands in this particular area. And I didn't say it, but part of the reason that the city hasn't developed it is because there are no feasible public service delivery options here for the city. So it's too far from the city's sewer and water supply or service pipes to be able to enable urban development here. And so the only way this moves forward in a realistic way at kind of an urban type of development, which is, I would say, the only thing that really makes sense here, is with the village's participation to be willing to extend those services into the city of Fitchburg. I should have stated that as part of why we're in the room. Yes.
Because I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Would anybody mind if we pause for just a couple minutes to see if we can get some more amplification?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that? Yeah.
I can also, I can also talk louder.
We want you to not be able to talk.
Yeah, Jake said that he's not coming.
Might want to cover your ears.
Now my question is, and they have to be close to that. Okay. Just making sure.
I'll go get another mic stand.
I'm starting to feel like a person at a press conference. All right, so that was sort of taking away my thunder on the big observations here. Here are the big observations, or the general observations that I make about in reaction to these conversations that we've had over the past month. I'd say the thing that's really a prime driving reason that we're in the room right now is because of the public landowners in the study area. So we'll talk more about this, but the Department of Corrections has a project moving forward right now, and the school district has a project intended in the future. And enabling the school district to move forward on that project, I think, is a motivating driver for both communities to support the school district and make it possible for that future school. The number one takeaway, and that's why I underlined it on the slide, is that I see really broad alignment on all the key issues. There's very little disagreement in the room and in the various people who have an interest in this. It's small things. It's not big things, if it's anything. So there's nothing fundamentally incompatible about what people want in this area that we've been able to find so far. There is desire to kind of capture this moment. Many of you are aware, I know from conversations I've had with you, that this has been tried before. There have been prior attempts between the city and the village to get together and figure out how to navigate this unusual circumstance. And for various reasons, it didn't happen. We seem to be in a moment here with broad agreement, as I said, and there is a desire to kind of lock that in with some agreements that will outlast all of you in your roles. Not in your lives, but in your roles. All right, can you still hear me if I'm standing here? Yeah? Is that good? Okay. And then the last note here is that what I think is probably the stickiest part to work out, and it's just going to take some time in rooms to work through the details, is there will be services provided by the village to development in the city in several different ways, and working out the logistics of that, the cost arrangements around that is something that's just going to take more discussion to kind of predict and project and decide. So we'll come back around to that. Into more of the details. Is there interest in development? That was one of the questions that we walked into these conversations with. And we already knew from some landowners, because they kept coming to both the city and the village asking, when can something happen? When can something happen? When can something happen? But we didn't know from everyone, and we've now talked to everyone. And I would summarize those conversations as saying that the amount of interest in seeking development of these agricultural lands, most of them, ranges from willing to consider that, at some point, open to that conversation, to yes, please, as soon as possible. I bought this land as an investment, and whenever you can figure that out, we're interested. So that's the range. And so there isn't anyone with acreage in the planning area saying, family farm, we don't want it to ever change. That isn't part of the discussion here. The Department of Corrections has quite a bit of acreage here. If you look at the map, let's see where I put the map in here. The land to most of the land to the north, beyond the green bubble, and to the west, beyond the green bubble, is all Department of Correction lands. And they are currently working toward a 2026 groundbreaking on their youth detention facility, which will be just to the north of the green bubble on the east side of the railroad tracks. The rest of their acreage, they are actively farming. They use what they produce on those lands to support their dairy operation in Waupun, and they intend to continue doing that. So the Department of Corrections has no interest in any other projects, any other expansions at this time, nor in selling off for development any of their acreage. So that's where they stand as of now, based on our conversation. The school district is, based on our recent conversations, looking at a likely school development, school construction project on that site in the 2030s. That's a big range, so that could be as soon as 5 years or as long as 15 years. And that variability, depending upon what happens with demographics and enrollment, and that's something that they're watching closely. But the current leadership of the district is very confident that that need will come up and that this is a good site. Sometimes districts are opportunistic about acquiring land and they look at it later and say, yeah, that's not really the right location, we'll sell that. We kind of probed for that, like, yeah, is that a possibility that you might sell it? He said, no, we really like the site, we think this is a good location, and so the school district is intending to, at some point, seek a school here. I think so I think that's moved around a little bit, but middle school is my recollection. Yeah, thank you. I was looking for nods. I think middle school is the current intent. If the school district does have a concept plan that they had put together not too long ago that's been floating around, that isn't intended as a clear vision of what that property is going to look like, but it identifies kind of the program for the site, and it includes a lot of athletic fields, which is their reflection of an understanding that there is some demand in the community, some need for more athletic fields, and they think that this could be a good combination with their school. It isn't the district's highest priority right now, but if there were an opportunity through partnership to fund and build fields here, it's conceivable that maybe a project like that could move ahead before school. But that is in the mix. There's enough acreage here that they own that they could consider both a school and some fields that would be maybe a collaboration that partly serves the district but also serves the community. Regarding timing, I would say these are the two things that are of most importance to when these lands might develop. The City of Fitchburg is currently working into a comprehensive plan update. At the stage right now of finding a consultant to do that and expecting that to take a couple of years. I would say, kind of based on where we're at right now and the need for planning for this area, I would be surprised if the city were to amend their plan just to allow development here. My guess from conversations and just what makes sense to me as a planner is this is going to get roped into that comprehensive plan update, which is going to land sometime in 28. So that's one of the timing considerations in play here. The other is, what are people interested in supporting? The school district, their ability to go ahead. If they're going to build in 2030, that doesn't feel all that urgent, but they'd have to start work toward that probably in 28. So those things are somewhat aligning. When we get to the end of the presentation, we'll talk more about next steps and touch on the timing issues again. Land use. Had conversations with everyone. What would you like to see? What wouldn't you like to see? What would be okay? What would be really great? And I've grouped these into most favored and least favored. Most favored in no particular order. These are just items that came up. I would say it's pretty diverse. There'd be a lot of things that I'd say could happen here. So offices, mixed use, sporting facilities, a quick trip. It's very specific, but it came up several times. Light industry, it's flat land near a highway. There's some logic to that. Possibly a hotel by the highway. So those are some of the things that came up when I asked what makes sense to you. And maybe the more important question is what wouldn't you want to see? So what are the things that you might be concerned about? So I have a longer list here. Heavy industry, and from the village's perspective, that would include attention to uses that would have a particular impact on their on the utilities. So something that's requiring a lot of water or creating a lot of wastewater or high-strength wastewater, not really desirable. Multi-tenant retail like strip mall, and I think this comes to maybe a question of form and design, but that one's on the question list. Large-scale residential use, by which I mean many units. I think most of the conversations, including both of the conversations with the municipal staff and officials, identified a large number of residential units here as not a preferred outcome. And the reason for that is that, again, you've got this collaborative approach on public services, and the expectation is, and the knowledge is that residential use tends to have more calls for service, including for emergency services. And having a large number of households here, you're just going to have more calls for service, whatever form they come in. And so that just makes it a little bit more of a headache, perhaps, as compared to areas that are close to existing city services, and exacerbates that collaboration and sharing need. Yeah.
I'm going to be asking a lot of questions.
Good.
Is the thought behind that because most of the need for services in the northern half of Fitchburg, that it would be Fitchburg, police, fire, EMS, having to travel far in order to get to the bottom of Fitchburg to respond to calls?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
I think that's right. And we're going to go into I'll go into a little bit more detail about kind of current thinking on how that works out. But the short answer is yes. That's the issue of concern.
Okay.
Low density residential, they were concerned not so much about the number of units, but about the utility of that land, and whether that's the best use for the land. Single family residential, especially larger lot single family residential, doesn't make much sense where you've got great highway access there. Income qualified housing is something that came up just because this isn't an area with public transit service available, but also that's sort of talking about the village as a whole, so just sharing that it came up. Self-storage, quarries, vape shops, car dealerships, car washes, anything low value, those also all came up. I think there is general consensus that I heard from both conversations that in general, high value outcomes, maybe not super high, but we want the area to look nice. We want to make good use of the land such that we've got good investment and tax revenue if we're going to be putting in infrastructure. I think that both the village and the city would like to see that. That was use. Now let's talk about design. What it looks like, how it's configured. Everyone recognizes this is the gateway to the village, a gateway to the village. It's the north gateway to the village. As people come and go from the metro center to the north, it is largely through this corridor. And so the village has an obvious interest in having some influence in what it looks like. And I think that's understood by the city, and the city is open to working with the village so that everyone's satisfied with the outcome. What that means is attention to the uses, attention to the materials used, attention to site design. And so where there are choices about how to configure buildings, using as sort of the front door basically of that corridor is desirable. Put the best face toward where everyone's going to be seeing it. itself, I think the village expressed this, and the city, I think, would agree that it's desirable for the roadway, the right-of-way, and the improvements in the right-of-way to also be attractive. So the example of a tree-lined boulevard came up, and I think that's just an example of a format that would sort of satisfy that desire for it to be an attractive gateway. And
Control what the localities have over that versus the county, given that it's a county highway.
Yeah, so the question about how much say the city gets, or the village, on a county facility is a topic for continuing discussion with the county. It plays into other discussions that the city has been having with the county about jurisdictional control. And I would say that we didn't dive too deep into resolving that, but we did acknowledge that there's another player in the mix on that. We also talked about the fact that there are two county facilities here. There's MM and there's M. This is the one that we're more concerned about. Our east-west route to the north can be, kind of more like it is probably, whereas this one, I think there's interest in improving it such that it serves as the gateway to the community that it is. Last note here, and I think this is a no-brainer, but I will say it anyhow. We want the streets and the trail network that I would expect to see in some fashion in a new development area to connect to the existing streets and trail network in the village. This is the other topic of probably greatest need for continuing discussion, both especially in an intergovernmental agreement, which is how does the city have, or excuse me, how does the village have voice in what gets built and how it gets built in the city? In most cases, in most areas, each community has its own regulations and makes its own decisions. And this is a case where, because it is a gateway to the village, and because the village would be agreeing to extend services to make development possible, the village would like a voice in what gets built. I think there is openness on both sides, and more importantly on the city's side, since it's the city that has the land use regulation authority. There's openness to doing this in a shared way, to do a shared planning process. So the city has been in the habit for many years of doing fairly detailed neighborhood plans before development occurs, and that would happen, I think, with the active participation of representatives from the village. And also in ordinance development, I think what we've talked about as the most likely functional outcome that gets a voice without creating extra layers of development review, which is a concern both in terms of the amount of effort that collectively it requires and also the effect that it has on developers. The desire would be to have the village and the city agree on what the standards are. I would suggest, and we had some discussion about this, that it's by both entities acting to adopt an overlay zoning ordinance that would guide those decisions, but then the village allowing the city to administer that. So you wouldn't necessarily need the village to have its own project by project approval mechanism. There is agreement to create this ordinance, and once you create the ordinance, the city simply administers the ordinance, and it meets the objectives that everyone agreed to in the ordinance. I think I've covered most of that. We talked about the importance for good communication, but the village not necessarily wanting to add another thing to the mix on a staff that's stretched pretty thin. And then we also talked about traffic impact. Because this is a corridor that is already pretty busy, wanting to understand how new development affects those conditions. I think this is also sort of a no-brainer. I know this is going to happen. The city does this anyhow with development, but we'll state that having a good understanding and control on the traffic impacts should be part of the process. All right, let's talk utilities. From a water standpoint, it's pretty easy because
We got a lot of water.
there is water. So the village has a standpipe in the city, in this area, with pipes that go through the area to serve the village from that. My understanding is that standpipe dates from shortly before the city became a city, and there were probably thoughts at the time, like, we're obviously growing in that direction to the highway let's put water up on this high point. The development didn't happen, but the water is still there. And so that pipe is already there. Some of you are probably already aware that there are efforts in the works right now to create a loop for water that creates redundancy and makes it possible to deal with water main breaks, and working with the Department of Corrections to try to achieve that because they need water for their new facility. So that's something that you guys are already working on, but just calling it out as something in the mix. The village noted that they don't want any new private wells. It's another one that the city would do anyhow, but good to put it out there and for shared understanding that we don't want private wells in an area that's going to be served by public water. Regarding sewer, there is an existing sewer line in this area coming from the village that serves the Department of Corrections. And while that pipe is there, it doesn't really do us much good from a, hey, let's serve new development perspective, because it was built for the volume and the use of the Department of Corrections, and they actually have some control over whether it could be used for any other purpose. And so I think functionally we can kind of set it aside. We know it's there, but it doesn't support development of this area. The village did do some good technical analyses of what is possible in terms of serving this area with sewer, in particular what's possible to do that by gravity, which is always our preference whenever we can to avoid additional pump stations. And if a new pipe were brought in so the village has a pump station on Braun Road, which is right down at the edge of the image there. A new pipe that comes from there, a little bigger, a little flatter, and heads out into the development area, could serve almost all of the area without needing any lift stations, except for the eastern corner over there next to the highway. It's just a little too low and too far away. So development over there, if it requires service, would require a lift station, most likely, for that to be servable.
Trying to Google this while we're talking. So I know the new facilities, new youth juvenile facilities being built in Fitchburg. I know that Oregon already has Oakville correctional facilities. Oakville's supposed to close.
No.
Okay.
I don't, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Nope. So nothing else is changing. They're just adding this facility.
Okay, thank you.
Had I gone forward one slide instead of backward 10, here's the image. Regarding cost recovery, for the most part, the sewer and water users are going to be paying for the cost of that service in a way that everyone already does and understands, and that's pretty straightforward. There will be a little bit of working things out when it comes to the improvements necessary to serve this land that may need to be extended to other properties that aren't developing right away. If it were within the village, I think the current practice is just to calculate what that share is and to assess them. It's a little harder to assess someone when they don't pay you taxes to begin with because they're not in your jurisdiction. So this is a solvable challenge. It just needs a different mechanism, and that's something that would be worked into the intergovernmental agreement to kind of define the terms of that mechanism. Other public services, so emergency services, most likely, based on the discussions we've had so far, first response needs would come from the village, because that's where that's where those services are. But then follow-up tasks, for example, follow-up investigation on something by the fire department or the police department, that'd be handed off to the city. And so the most likely, and again, we weren't really making decisions, but there was just kind of trying to think it through and conjecture how is this likely to work? What makes sense? It's just the first response needs that would be handled by the village. I already talked about the low enthusiasm for high call uses, meaning just having a lot of households. The other thing in the mix, probably worth noting, is that you are together pursuing exploration of a joint services district for emergency services. We'll wait to see if you get there, but if you get there, this may go away, right? Because it'll just be one shared district that's serving the needs, and the formation of that district will solve this for you. Street maintenance is another thing that's going to need to be figured out, just in terms of projecting the costs and then figuring out the particular mechanism year by year that those costs are paid. It probably makes more sense for the village to be sending in street sweepers and plows and leaf collection services than it does to drive down from the areas where those services are currently occurring in the city. But you just need to work out, like, all right, what are those costs? How are we going to figure that out each year and bill the city appropriately? It's going to require good communication between the departments for handoffs and awareness of things. As an example, when a plow hits a curb and it busts up the curb inside the village right now, not a big deal. Public Works talks to itself and says, we're going to have to fix that. It'll be a little different when it's someone else owns the curb. Again, navigable, but just one of those wrinkles that the departments will have to figure out together. And then, we talked about this in all the different ways, but a cost-sharing agreement is what needs to be worked into an intergovernmental agreement, so that you can just get into the habit of figuring out those payments year by year. So that's everything we learned, and these are somewhat coming from me, but coming from me with discussion, in particular with the administrators and the planners, as we've talked about how do we think this plays out and what are the steps needed to be completely up and running. The intergovernmental agreement is the first thing. That's really going to cement the terms of what you're going to do moving forward, and that is in effect a contract that's enforceable. And I'll note that things are very much aligned right now. I have seen other communities that are aligned and they fall out of alignment just because personalities change, conditions change. But using this moment to get to an intergovernmental agreement that works these things out, you can then rest on that agreement to have this work for both communities. The next step then, the city has to update its comprehensive plan, and we would expect to see the land use intentions for this area represented in that plan. It has been the city's habit for any new development area to do a neighborhood plan, and so the city needs that. And then I talked about the overlay zoning district as the most likely mechanism that we see right now for how you reach agreement and then implement design, both land use and design intentions for the area. And so hopefully that can be done. It seems 2029 sounds actually not that far off right now. That's not that far away. That's what we're seeing. That's my last slide. Who else has questions?
Yeah, just more of a comment than I need to lead by one of these. Okay. More of a comment than anything. The village is in the middle of doing a transportation planning grant to try to get public transportation. So you feel like it's something that's coming, and I've always kind of envisioned that some of that land somewhere being used for maybe a park and ride or something like that. And I just wanted to throw it out there as an idea that you guys are thinking about, like reserving a little bit of space for something like that should it happen. We don't have a good timeline. We're still just planning, but just throwing it out there.
And I should note that the conclusion of my effort with you guys right now is going to be a written version of the same. And I was waiting until after tonight so that I would have the opportunity to incorporate some things that come up tonight, because this is part of that process as well.
I can just jump in on the point about the park and ride. As part of the Beltline PEL study that WISDOT is working on, they've identified a couple different options for park and rides in Fitchburg. One of them is in the 14 corridor. Right now, that looks like they've more identified 14 and Lacey as kind of that area. My opinion as somebody who lives in that area and represents that area is that it's not the best land use. I would actually very much prefer something at 14 and M and MM. So I think that's an area where I would find alignment with that suggestion as well, because it also is a lower, certainly a lower use from emergency services.
Maybe that fits on the area where the sewer can't serve.
I have a question. I'm curious about if we developed light industry there, would the presence of a significant number of semi-trucks change the structure of that intersection from roundabouts to something else? Like sometimes they have a little trouble navigating the roundabouts?
Not being an engineer, a traffic engineer myself, I should start with that disclaimer. It is designed, I think, to allow semis, but you've probably observed some challenges to it. Sometimes people see the semis use the skirt on the inside and think that that's a problem. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a design feature.
Right.
When the back, the trailer goes over the skirt. I would also note, though, that if light industry is one of the uses there and there's truck traffic, one of the preferences may be to keep that traffic onto M instead of MM and direct it in from up there, as opposed to bringing it all the way through and south on MM first. Right. And I think that, obviously coming out from there, one way or another, you're using the full roundabout. But in theory, it should be fine. There could be a volume question that comes up, but I think it can handle the semis.
Thank you.
Abstract question, but how, if the development we're thinking occurs, what does this look like 30 years from now, when maybe the area is a lot more developed and maybe, I know I'm on camera saying this, but if Fitchburg is some point no longer half rural, if like a lot of development comes through that area, is this type of proposed development amenable to that change?
Yeah, I think that really the only thing that's unusual that you're trying to navigate is the part about the village providing services instead of the city in this area. And I can imagine a scenario, as I think you are, years in the future, where there is other development in the city close to here that, and even city sewer and water closer to here. In that case, I doubt that the piping would change. Like, the piping is what it is, and it probably wouldn't make sense to change that. But some of the first response, emergency service sort of thing, potentially that's something that could change if you haven't been operating as one unit for 30 years at that point anyhow.
Sure. Thank you.
I might add to Joe's question is that I think part of the intergovernmental agreement needs to address exactly that. And that is, what happens in 30 years? What might change? Clearly by then there'll be many boards have come and gone, and I think we need to have we would need to have something in place to give them direction.
Many intergovernmental agreements have language in them that describes how they'll be reviewed and updated, and I would expect exactly that. So we don't anticipate that what you figure out right now is going to solve it for the next century. There's going to be iterative efforts over the years, and that's something that should be covered in the agreement.
Jason, are there models elsewhere in Dane County we could look at to kind of answer some of these bigger questions? I think of like DeForest and Windsor. Are we kind of starting from scratch here, or do we have some neighbors nearby we can kind of lean on as a guide to potentially asking some of these questions and then answering some of those questions?
Yep, I think that's right, and I think you hit upon the one that's probably a good partner to talk to. I'm aware that there are situations where, you know, it's one community's pipe, but it's the other community that's using it, and so it's worth checking with that. And the city has already been doing that to some extent. I mean, the city has, you know, sort of convoluted boundaries with Madison, and there's already some of that sharing going on. So my saying you got to figure this out doesn't mean that you have to invent the wheel. It just means you have to spend a little time sitting down and thinking through how it's going to work. But it's not a big lift, but it'll take some discussion. Or I should say, it is feasible. You're not creating something that's never happened before. I don't feel like I gave you guys enough to really chew on. It's not controversial. Everyone's in agreement. What else is anyone concerned about? What do you think might derail this? I invite you to say that. It's okay. This is a safe space to say. Yeah, right. This safe, very public space.
I think there's an awful lot of variables and an awful lot of things to consider that we may not be thinking of until we run into a problem, and then we're going to have to scramble for, you know, how do we handle this particular edge case? Because it's going to, you know, we didn't think of it before. It happened now. It's going to happen in the future. We got to, you know, so there's an unknown number of those things, right?
Yep, there is. But I would say that the same is true of running a city or a village. You're doing this all the time, and this is just in the context of you're going to put together a working group to work on this intergovernmental agreement. That working group is going to be meeting regularly to start hashing these things out, and you're going to think of hopefully most of them, and then, you know, you'll get to the end and think, oh wait, what about this? And you're going to deal with that. You're going to figure it out.
I think the other potential threat is just the whims of the electorate, and, you know, the amount of time this is going to take to pull together, and the possibility of significant turnover of the people that are sitting in the room doing this is one of the challenges we'll just have to navigate.
My experience in helping communities with intergovernmental agreements is that it always takes longer than you thought.
Right.
And you're always looking at the calendar and considering when's the next election and who might not be here when it comes time to adopt this. So that calculus should be on people's minds. Right now, it seems like there's a fair amount of stability in the room. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, that's inevitably. So right. I think you're right. You're right to call that out. That's something to keep in mind.
I will say my bigger concern is also timeline, mostly because your presentation, I think, highlights the fact that, at least in my experience, what you have found and captured and summarized is a lot of work, and it could have taken us 3 times as long if we hadn't thought creatively about utilizing CARPC and the strengths that you have. And I would hate to see that progress slow way down now. And so I think that's one of my bigger concerns, is like we've gone so far and we've made some real progress, and I want to make sure that we keep our foot on the gas a little bit, obviously being responsible and aware of those conversations and the timing that is appropriate for those things, but continuing to keep that motivation and drive going.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and we had a little bit of discussion, the administrators and I, about what we say is the desired timeline for this effort. I think getting through an intergovernmental agreement in about a year is a reasonable goal, and that could happen. But also, I don't want any of you to think that you failed if you don't get it done within a year. But kind of combining those thoughts, start now and set interim objectives. Like, we're going to have a draft that we can share with Village and Board by this date is our goal. To get some ideas down on paper so that you start chewing on it. Because my experience with these is you don't think of things until you put it on paper, you put it in front of more eyes, and they think of it. So you just have to start putting things down on paper.
Thank you.
I just wanted to acknowledge the great collaboration that's happening here. I think we all agree with that. I think it's wonderful. We first talked about this at our committee of the whole back in, looks like June 26, 2024. And so it's been a little bit since we originally talked about it, but I know that there were a lot of conversations happening between now and then. And I also am surprised by how fast this got done. I guess when we approved the funding for it, I just thought it would take longer, and I'm very pleased, so thank you for rapidly getting that done. And I love, too, that we're already talking about a fire district, a shared fire district. We all know how we face so many challenges as municipalities, and it only gets harder every year to meet some of those challenges. And I think a lot of us are realizing how much collaboration is going to be one of the solutions that we have to take advantage of, and good robust partnerships. And there's a lot of great things between the City of Fitchburg and the Village of Oregon already, and I love that we're moving in this direction, and that this was the presentation we got tonight. There's a lot here. There's a lot of things, like there's already a water pipe in place, like surprising things like that I did not realize that I think put us ahead of the game. So I'm excited to continue seeing this move forward and these discussions continue. So thanks to everybody from both the staff perspective and the elected officials too.
I'm gonna pat you guys on the back a bit for wanting to do this process in this way. It was well received by the property owners, some of whom have been around long enough to see other attempts where they felt like they learned about it well into the discussions. And this time we started with them and said, we're just starting to talk, what are your interests? And they appreciated that.
Excuse me. I will be the Debbie Downer to my colleague Alder Gerhardt's positive remarks from just now, and circling back to some challenges that I think could come into play here. If I remember correctly, this was isn't this pretty high quality farmland from a soil perspective, even though it's not in that family farm? It's owned more by kind of the larger property owners. So I could see, especially in more rural parts of Fitchburg, there would be some concerns about losing that farmland, and the concern about, well, Fitchburg is growing south, and then now we're starting to creep north from Oregon. Are they kind of getting squeezed in the middle? I could see that being a concern that comes up at some point. I think it would be helpful to codify pretty early on and say, this is as far as we're going to extend these utilities into the city from the village. Whether it be, well, technically we can't go any further because we'd need a lift station and we don't want to get to that level of cost. Or if it's even just in that intergovernmental agreement, kind of providing some clearer frameworks for the public to say, this is a targeted area that is not family farmland. It's surrounded by a railroad track, a highway, and a youth prison. So it's not exactly, the most desirable land from like a residential standpoint. So I think just laying that out with the public and clarifying in our intentions would be very important.
Thank you. I think you're right to point that out, and I think it's an open question for your work group as to whether and how that's expressed in the intergovernmental agreement. I'm not going to say it either way, in my opinion, as I look at it, whether that totally makes sense or doesn't make sense. It definitely is going to be a topic of discussion for the city in the comprehensive plan amendment. But I could imagine that because this is probably kind of happening concurrently, that it ends up finding its way into this as well.
I'll make a comment about back to the maybe more potentially positive aspects of this, that as much as I do go to the nuts and bolts of this and think about like, let's see, how do we plow versus how does Fitchburg plow, that kind of thing, and how that all has to be worked out. But I also see the potential for, again, where we have two communities that are living side by side and some possible way of discovering either new opportunities for cost savings between the community and that ability that we need to be able to work together, because we're not necessarily always getting the needs that we meet our residents with from larger places like the state or the federal government, and being able to do some of that stuff more locally and bring down some of those virtual barriers that we might have to doing that offers some opportunity with collaboration. Even if this one doesn't work, we may discover other things about using this exercise in collaboration.
You had mentioned that you spoke with the surrounding owners and received pretty overwhelming support, at least not negative reactions to this plan. I was wondering if the Wisconsin River Rail Transit Commission was included in that ownership group, and if so, what kind of reaction they had.
We did not talk to the Rail Commission.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
And because we haven't talked really about the rail line at all today, I'll note that it did come up in a few conversations, including the fact that at one time it was jointly owned by the city and the village. It no longer is. If there were the possibility of a rail siding into these lands between the MM and the rail, there could be some logic there, but also you'd have to cross the utility lines that are in there, which is not a deal killer, but just something to keep in mind. So there's a corridor for utility lines that it would then have to get over on the other side of. But also, repeating my answer to your question, we didn't actually check in with the railroad on that. Thank you. I don't know that you guys, either as a city or village, have made any specific commitments to what the next step is going to look like. We right now it's as general as intergovernmental agreement. I'm going to suggest that the specificity is probably formation of a joint committee that's going to start work on that, and that's probably some combination of staff and elected officials. But I've seen this happen. It might start just with staff, and so that's a topic for you guys to kind of talk through, whether you start with officials right away or maybe you start a first draft with staff. But coming up with that work group is probably the practical next step.
I'm going to direct a question at the administrators and see if has been discussion about potential next steps after this report.
I would offer that I think it'd be helpful for at least me and my perspective coming out of this meeting if it was demonstrated support from both bodies for staff to continue working on this. And I would offer along Jason's suggestion that we probably start to work on maybe a memorandum of understanding as to what we're going to do collectively and how we might get there, and then ultimately begin work on that intergovernmental agreement if we decide to take that process. But obviously, I have not worked with another municipality on a development like this, so we'll see how it all shakes out, and we'll learn along the way. I don't know if you have anything to add, Martin, at all on how you might want to, if you got other ideas on how we approach it.
No, I'd agree. The intention, I think, that we discussed with this meeting was we get the presentation, we have an opportunity to all digest it, kind of go our separate ways, and then I think, at least my intention was to reconnect and figure out what that next step is, and then we'll present to our bodies and come back together on whatever those steps are.
I have a question. Can we continue working with CARPC in this process, because they can continue provide us? I agree with you that we need someone to continue with this momentum, and also to have the guidance of CARPC on how to do the memorandum of understanding and how to create this joint committee, and I don't know.
That's a question for Jason.
Yeah.
I'm open to that. I don't think it's I don't think what you're talking about is a big lift in terms of hours, because more so it's probably just having a third party that's sort of holding your feet to just continuing to meet, and then being a third party in the room for periodic meetings. This is a harder lift than that'll be if that's just showing up at some meetings.
Yeah, I think you've helped us get organized, so I appreciate your efforts, and I would encourage more of that personally.
Does CARPC have some expertise and experience in this sort of intergovernmental agreement?
I do. So I spent 19 years as a planning consultant before I started with CARPC a couple years ago, and over the years I've been involved in boundary agreement drafting and negotiations here in Dane County and also in the La Crosse area. So have seen it in various permutations over the years, yeah.
Well, I see no other questions. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions in the future, but I want to thank Jason once again for a wonderful presentation, and thank everyone for being here tonight. This was a great conversation and a great start. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned at 6:33 p.m. Thank you.